From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Conventional solutions, as we've outlined, don't work. We could fill hours debating them, their pros and cons. They come in all sorts of forms. You'll see the glossy PR pledges from insert company here. Lego says this, McDonald's says that. You'll also see those non-binding resolutions from international organizations, UN committees. You'll see any number of TED Talks. You'll see sweeping declarations from billionaires like Bill Gates says we need to fix this or that or whatever. And to be clear, the vast majority of those proposed solutions are made in good faith, and they're made by very intelligent people, but they fall short of their goals and they fade from the headlines. It makes sense that they fade from the headlines because, let's face it, fellow conspiracy realists, most people don't like to think about the end of the world, especially if they feel like they've got it pretty good right now.
They're also not sexy because they're long-term solutions. That right. People want instant gratification, so it's like it's a lot to ask for people to like think about 10 years down the line when they can have something yesterday.
Well,
especially if you're only in office for 4 to 8 years.
Yeah, I would posit. Seriously, I would posit the biggest problem we face is that the solutions to these problems are not inherently profitable. Right?
No joke, dude.
Because it's.
No, I mean, you're so right.
I mean, who pays you right now to clean carbon out of the ocean? There are groups from colleges and companies that are attempting to do that kind of work and develop technologies for that. But who's going to pay you outside of maybe a government grant? Because the citizens are paying more taxes, so that then it can happen. And it's just. It's not immediately appealing to anyone.
I mean, maybe once they figure out how to turn that ocean cleaning stuff into like the spice melange or something, But other than that, it's pretty dire.
That's where you see more like neoliberal market-based approaches. That's why outfits like The Economist are always so Twitter-pated about a carbon tax. You know what I mean? And is that a viable solution? Some people are convinced it is. Other people are convinced it's not. But we are living in the 6th great mass extinction. For anybody who is looking for another example of a mass extinction, think about why we don't have dinosaurs anymore, right? Like, we have things that survive from dinosaurs, chickens, etc. But you're not going to see a T-Rex until cloning goes, cloning reaches some breakthroughs.
Or maybe in the metaverse.
Yet. Or maybe you'll see an NFT T-Rex. Who knows?
An NFT Rex.
But the issue is, and I think about this a lot, and I wish more people would mention this. We are living in what is commonly called nowadays the Anthropocene. Right? So about like the Pleistocene, etc. The Anthropocene is just a dressed up word for the age of humanity. And it is overwhelmingly likely that the biggest legacy all these people who have lived and died will end up leaving is a wreck of Earth, is a mass extinction. We are in the middle of it. It is happening. It is possible that the idea of wildlife will sound like a crazy story to your grandchildren. That's, again, I'm not being hyperbolic. This is happening. And this is something people knew about for more than half a century. And this frustration turned to desperation. And some folks said, we have to go beyond writing letters or going to protest or just recycling, for 5-cent refunds, and, when you turn in a glass bottle or something. And that's where we saw the rise of something called radical environmentalism in the 1960s. And we can dive into a little more of that ideology as the show goes on. But from radical environmentalism, we see the rise of people and groups who decided, let's cut past these useless, doomed negotiations. Let's skip beyond the half measures, those so-called toothless proposals. Let's take direct action. Today, those people are known as eco-terrorists. Eco-terrorist, what does it mean? It's a portmanteau, obviously. Ecology plus terrorism. It's a combo not quite as popular as peanut butter and jelly. And at first glance, it feels like a really loaded term. Like you would hear this on far-right news, right? Someone would say, these people want to stop an oil pipeline. They're eco-terrorists. You know what I mean? And next up, the war on Christmas. It feels very, very biased. But I found something interesting. The far left activists that were described as eco-terrorists, they had a war with the far right to control the definition of that word. And they were saying stuff like, hey, we're not the eco-terrorist. ExxonMobil is the eco-terrorist. They are terrorizing Earth with what they're doing. Unfortunately, the left lost that argument. And so now when you hear eco-terrorists, you have to be really conscious of the source, because you might just be hearing like a hit piece from a corporation disguised as news.
Absolutely. No question about it. That term has been weaponized. Would the Weather Underground be considered eco-terrorism? I know they were domestic terrorists. They seem more political specifically, but it all is kind of political since the environment's been politicized. So you're kind of fighting against policy too when you're carrying out some of these acts.
Yeah. The Weather Underground probably has some Venn diagram situations, some overlap in notable individuals and so on, but they're not considered as focusing on environmental issues. They were more oriented, as you said, toward political change, like the big proponents of communist ideology. I don't know. When I think of conservation environmental groups, I think of like the panda logo on the World Wildlife Fund or Federation or whatever it's called, the other WWF. Right. I think of like Sarah McLachlan telling you to treat puppies better.
The arms of the angels. I was just talking to my kid about that the other night. She never had the privilege of experiencing that ad campaign with the sad puppies in the shelters and Sarah McLachlan's saddest song in the world, especially when paired with sad puppies.
Yeah. But this is like when you think of this kind of activism, you probably have a stereotype in your head, right? There's a scent of patchouli wafting through the air. Someone's playing a sitar. Everybody is wearing something that's somehow made out of hemp. Probably don't think of people launching RPGs at nuclear facilities, but that's part and parcel of this. Eco-terrorists are defined by their tactics more so than their ideology, but ideology is part of it. They're perpetrating acts of violence against people or property or companies with the aim of not killing folks, but disrupting actions that they feel are damaging to the environment. And the word itself is kind of new. It's from like the 1960s, you could call it 1970s, it gets popularized. But the idea of using guerrilla tactics to fight the power it's like surprisingly old. A lot of people have done this. A lot of people have like banded together in sort of a we must protect the wild kind of vibe. One example is in France. In 1827, a bunch of peasants revolted against the government's new codes regarding forestry and how to harvest resources from the forest, who could do what, etc. And they went into a full-out war. It's called the War of the Maidens. So they didn't call it eco-terrorism, but that's what it was. That's what we would call it today.
The French take foraging very seriously.
And then additionally, take the example of indigenous native populations in the Americas when Europeans came to colonize this, and they have very different philosophies on how humans should relate to the land, right? And native populations fought to protect their philosophy, which was clearly less exploitative than the pitch that these colonials were coming in with. It's weird. A ton of people throughout history have fought wars over how they feel land should be used or preserved. And when we talk about eco-terrorists, there are real genuine groups that can be described as such. It's important to say, it's not like one lone actor, right? It's not some quote unquote unstable person going rogue, right? These are groups who get together for this purpose. And I was surprised to find that the FBI back in 2008 specifically name-checked eco-terrorist as, quote, one of the most serious domestic terrorism threats in the U.S. today. And they backed up the reasoning, too. Like they had, at first I thought, nah, I don't know, you guys are exaggerating. But then they laid out their rationale, and it does make sense that they would describe them as a serious threat.
Yes, and this assessment was due to the volume of crimes, over 2,000 known incidents from 1979 to 2008. And if you think about the economic impact of those incidents, it was over $110 million. And that also includes the wide range of victims, the companies and things that were impacted by the actions and incidents. The FBI saw an increasing trend toward violence. And there was also a 2004 FBI document you can read on, I believe it's on archives.fbi.gov. That's from 2004. And it's the same kind of thing. It's a judiciary committee where they're talking about the extreme seriousness of eco-terrorism. And they're taking it very, very seriously.
And then at this point, of course, this is where we all have to have that gut check with ourselves and say, how much do I trust the FBI? We'll get to that part too. Yeah, we'll get to that part too. But let's talk about some specific groups that have been described as eco-terrorists. There's Earth Liberation Front, or ELF. I know it's ELF, but I like saying ELF. There's Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, or SHAC. Or, personal favorite, Animal Liberation Front, ALF.
Yeah.
I just like that it's ALF.
Does it eat cats, do you think?
I was wondering about that too. I haven't emailed them yet.
It's not very eco-friendly, eating cat.
Yeah.